There is a particular silence that belongs to a shore after the moon has taken back her tide, a silence not of absence, but of remembered things waking in their sleep. We stand where trees once stood, and those trees have kept a catalog of small, patient secrets. Beneath our feet the peat gives, cool and obliging, releasing each step as a private percussion. The grit murmurs under our soles, tiny shells ticking like distant coins, and from the west a gull threads a long, solitary note that stretches and thins into the dark. You may stoop and let your palm find blackened wood. It will answer with the faintest hollow sound, ridged in one place, glass smooth where sunlight once touched it in a vanished season. We feel the texture like a map, the memory held in grain and scar. One might suppose these trunks to be mute, yet they speak in small noises, a stump settling with a soft thunk, seaweed giving with a little pluck, the distant creak of an old rope. Listen with your body now. Feel the cool press beneath your toes. Match your breathing to the tide. Inhale as the sea withdraws, exhale as it returns. Let your shoulders loosen and your jaw unclench as the world slows with us. Tonight we will walk, slowly and without hurry, among these sleeping columns, and the shoreline will tell us what it has chosen not to forget. The tide's retreat reveals more than sand tonight. It unveils memory. Long, dark shapes rise from the shoreline. Ancient trunks, roots twisted like slow lightning. The remnants of a forest that once stood proudly beneath a hotter sun. Now they lie half dreaming in the cool night air, softened by centuries, shaped by water's patient hand. We move between them, quietly, our steps cushioned by damp earth and drifting strands of seagrass. The trunks tilt at gentle angles, some upright like sentinels, others curved as though bowing toward a story only the sea remembers. Each one carries the scent of deep time, a faint mineral sweetness, a breath of vanished monsoon winds that once fed their leaves. When a palm rests on a fallen root, the wood yields slightly, smooth in one place, furrowed in another, like the handwriting of tides. Another root, darker, bears grooves that feel like a forgotten script, not words, but the ghost of writing the ocean practiced and erased, practiced and erased again. A slow heartbeat under the surface, a sound between wood and wave, and we realize it is our own pulse echoing through our fingertips. The forest is teaching the body how to remember stillness. Once, these trees drank fresh water from inland streams. Now they drink the sky, rain carried through salt and silt. Each ring of wood holds a conversation between storm and calm. Some rings are wide, seasons generous and reckless. Others are thin as breath, speaking of years when light was stingy. We kneel beside a trunk half buried in peat. The peat gives like folded cloth, faintly sweet and a little bitter, the smell of things content to disappear slowly. When we press fingertips into it, the indentation fills with a glimmering film of water, and for a moment it looks like an eye-opening. The senses form a seam that stitches us to the place. The moon climbs higher, shadows lengthen and tilt. The air thickens with quiet intention. Sound behaves differently here. It does not echo, it lingers. Each drip, each sigh of wind, folds back into itself until silence feels like a living thing we can walk inside. Far out, fish that never saw the forest green glide through its ghost as we pass. A reminder that life translates itself differently across ages. Patterns emerge if we listen long enough. The wind moves in phrases. The surf repeats like an incantation. The ocean rehearses history. It is a curious fact that elements are both audience and poet. We find a fallen limb with a faint bioluminescent bloom clinging at its tip. When brushed gently, the algae light pools beneath our fingertips, thought fragments made visible for an instant. The drowned world wakes in small, absurd ways. Our feet sink, the ground sighs, a heron lifts and leans east. Each motion belongs to a larger stillness. The stars incline lower, and the horizon trembles with reflected light, a soft geometry between two worlds. We speak in whispers as though louder voice might wake the forest's entire memory at once. Better to move gently, one breath at a time. There is a hush like listening from within a shell. Our thoughts slow. The body loosens. Memory becomes porous, a tide inside the mind. A church bell from inland rings, its note carried and bent by the channel. Faith meets salt, and the sound leaves a hollow sweetness that fades again. Under our toes, each step leaves a small print that the tide will soon collect. The shore becomes a map of brief constellations drawn by feet. Mist forms low over the shallows and wraps stumps in silver cloth. They drift, half anchored, half adrift, the same way thoughts drift just before sleep. It is tempting to call this place a ruin. That word feels sharp. This is translation rather than ending. The forest has swapped alphabets. Listen beneath ordinary sound, and you may hear the language of silt, consonants of settling grains, vowels of water folding over itself. That tongue speaks of patience older than fire, older than speech. Perhaps people once spoke to these trees. Perhaps they carved charms in bark before the first tide rose. The words are gone, but gestures remain, fingers tracing wood, a pause afterward. We are part of that remembering. Each step is lightly written on water and then erased with silver precision. Ahead, the outline of something rises from mist, a geometry too deliberate for driftwood, angled stones, moss terraces, a stair hinting beneath a sheen of water. The waves hush around it in a respectful way, as if the sea itself recognizes a construction of human intent. The first stone bears grooves like the trunks, but arranged with pattern. They catch moonlight in lines that converge on a submerged stair. The structure reveals itself slowly, a terrace edge, a suggestion of steps descending beneath the surface. The sea guarded its secret well, yet here it allows a glimpse. We edge closer, the air tastes colder. Mist muffles sound to a soft blanket. The carved lines glow with blue algal light in spots. Nature yields to memory's design. Root becomes wall, and wood becomes lintel. Again we breathe together. Slow in, longer out. Feel the damp cool the lips. The salt and peat mingle into a single, calming scent. It anchors the mind. Perhaps the builders were patient hands who set each stone to catch a certain light. Their tools were soft and human. Bone, stone, wood. The architecture is an inscription of survival, a laborious way to say, without flourish. We chose to make steadiness here. If we lay our palm on a carved lintel, we feel immediate cold and a faint retained warmth, a tiny echo of hands that once held it. Stone keeps touch. It is a slow, humble witness. By night, the gull's earlier call has thinned. Peat exhales. The shore sounds compress into the background hum of the tide. We have walked harbor to hearth, trunk to terrace, and in those movements something gentle settles. The sense that the modest traces, a child's print, a maker's notch, a smooth peg, are the true ledger of care. It is a curious fact that ordinary acts become monuments with time. Now, rest your hands on your knees. Feel your shoulders soften. Let breath lengthen like tide pulling back. We move back from the threshold as the tide prepares its return. Each step grows crisp and slow. The shore accepts us in patience we do not deserve. The world allows witness without demand. In the faint light, we notice a small motif carved into a lintel. A circle within a circle, private and unostentatious. A maker's thumbprint. Imagine a child pressing fingers to that motif and tracing it, as if reading Braille. That image steadies the heart. Curiosity as a lasting echo of a culture. Consider the ecology. Salt-tolerant grasses take the place of barley. Reed beds colonize and host new birds. Memory here is ecological as well as human. Species inscribe their own history into the margins. We stand at the rim of the stone approach and look back. The trees lean like custodians, shadows long and protective. Places that are noticed tend, with time, to persist in better health, a modest moral of attention. A bead of bone, threaded on cord, sits in a crevice, smoothed by fingers who spoke soft benedictions. It is not a grand relic, but a talisman of ordinary compassion, a comfort meant to be returned to a small hand if fortune allowed. Night presses sound softer. The peat closes small hollows with a settling whisper. A gentle clasp signals rest. Let that closing sound become a cue for your eyelids. Let its cadence be where waking loosens into sleep. We close our hands lightly and allow the world to tuck us into rest, and let the sleep come now quietly. One might begin, as a cautious scholar begins, by measuring the absence. How does one measure a hollow that is no longer a place? Do we count the rings of drowned timbers as one might count a ledger? Or do we listen for the way peat exhales when it is cut and imagine that exhalation stretched into centuries? Slow pause. It is a curious fact that the questions we ask of a vanished shore shape the answers we will later find plausible. The manner of the asking arranges inference as much as evidence does. Listen first to the simplest sound of loss, the slow, domestic noises that stop happening. Imagine a child who once called for another at dusk and hears no calling in return. The long, ordinary rhythm of life is interrupted not by spectacle, but by absence, and the lack itself acquires an acoustic character, a missing laugh, a silence at the hearth, an unstruck flint. Such absences do not record well in the public ledger. They survive in household memory and in the odd, resistant layer of peat that will not relinquish the shape of a small shoe. How did those silences begin? Were they sudden, a noise like a snapped cord, or slow, a hush like snow? Let us set out 3 plausible grammars of disappearance, each offered with the polite skepticism of a person who knows that the earth seldom agrees to be read simply. The first I call the patient return, a long, polite reclaiming of land by the sea. In this model, the shore yields over generations. Brackishness creeps into wells. Reeds change species. Fields that once grew herbs now salt up and fail. The acoustic signature is mid-frequency. The soft, persistent groan of bog bones shifting, the thin rasp of new sedge along a bank, the small, repetitive sound of animals led inland in ever shorter circuits. It is attractive because it comforts. It gives time for farewell, for adaptation, for the gradual reconfiguration of habit. Yet one must not confuse grace with harmlessness. Patience will undermine a bank as surely as a blade will cut a rope, and slow loss can be as brutal as storm. The second hypothesis is the sudden inlet, a violent breaching of coastline, a storm that cleaves an estuary anew and invites the sea to come with a trumpet. Here the soundscape is percussive, the tightening of ropes, the screaming of wind, the heavy, terrifying roar as water finds a new throat. Legends favor this grammar. People prefer villains and single nights because stories need a face to resist. A sudden event produces dramatic layers in the sediment, abrupt deposits of sand, a scatter of hurriedly buried goods, a cemetery whose stratigraphy points to a compressed moment of catastrophe. Yet, even here, interpretation is slippery. Storm sand may wash in one night and be reworked for a century thereafter. Abruptness visible in one profile may be smoothed by another. The third account is the one I find most quietly compelling, the human slow undoing. It binds together hands and tide, the everyday actions of those who live by resource and necessity. Peat cutting for fuel lowers the level of the ground. Dikes in one place divert water to another. Grazing patterns change the resilience of marsh grasses. Reed harvest, drainage, and the shifting of tracks for pasturage all conspire in ways rarely visible to a single generation. The acoustic signature is domestic and precise. The scrape of a spade, the soft thwack of reeds set into place, the steady clack of counting shells. This explanation is ethically awkward because it refuses to isolate a villain. Responsibility is distributed, patient, and mundane, 1,000 small acts adding to a grand result. Who, then, do we blame? The question is less useful than the observation. Sometimes disappearance is a collaboration, not a conquest. It is a curious fact, one that delights the storyteller and vexes the tidy scholar, that the evidence will often seem to support all three narratives at once. In a single core, one may read layers of storm sand, horizons of gradual salinization, and cut marks where peat was removed. Each layer offers a different grammar of change. Do we prefer multiplicity or a single cause? The drowned landscape seems to prefer multiplicity, and in that preference lies both consolation and admonition. Let us examine, in closer scale, the signs by which these explanations are inferred. There are stakes driven into mud that form revetments. Their echoes are unmistakably human, a percussive series of punctuations attempting rhythmically to outsing the sea's long hymn. There are also beds of sand whose abrupt seams speak of surges. These are the quick, noisy acts of nature fluent with power. Between these extremes dwell the unremarkable traces, patchy vegetation patterns, old field soils where barley would once grow, slight hollows where wells have gone brackish. Each of these registers is a voice. A comprehensive reading requires ear as much as eye. Consider, as a case, a small household whose departures are preserved in a peat pocket, a child's shoe, a potsherd, a few beads, a hearthstone overturned and then covered. The shoe indicates suddenness to the romantic mind, an object abandoned mid-use. The hearthstone suggests deliberation. People rarely leave hearths in haste without securing valued things. Archaeology may present both in temporal adjacency, a hurried deposition of valuables one day, a slow abandonment over seasons. Which narrative prevails? Often the local tale will choose one that fits identity. A proud people prefer to tell of heroic resistance or dignified departure. Shameful neglect may be quietly redacted. There is also the matter of oral culture and its sonic adaptations. Songs, refrains, and ritual often alter in response to repeated minor losses. I am put in mind of a simple phenomenon. When a community learns that certain winds are likely to bring harm, they may sing a verse with a pause at the word for storm, so that the pause itself teaches caution to children. Such performative silences are acoustic technologies of risk management. They keep a people alive by inculcating cautious motion. Anthropologists who listen closely find that mnemonic pauses, verbal tics, and ritualized mutterings are often the most reliable records of what people did in response to environmental stress. Yet even the practice of listening has its own bias. The modern scientist, trained in the visual authority of maps and cores, may prefer datasets and charts. The traditional keeper of lore favors narrative and song. Both are legitimate, and both are partial. It is a scholar's duty to weave them, but doing so requires humility. We trade the arrogance of certainty for the gentler dignity of probabilistic narrative. There are small, effective traces which resist interpretation yet insist upon our pity. A cluster of child-sized prints leading toward a now-broken bank might suggest a panicked flight. A careful deposit of jewelry beneath a hearth may signal a planned hiding place intended for return. Which is truer? Both, perhaps. Human behavior is rarely monolithic. Families made choices according to immediate exigencies and long-term plans, and these rhythms overlap in the archaeological record. It is tempting to tell a single compelling story, but the honest teller must often allow for an ambiguity that will not be cleaned away by rhetorical flourish. What, then, of the voices recovered by science? In laboratories, peat gives up pollen like a whispering book. Each grain is a reluctant witness to vegetation change. Carbon dates provide windows that are popularly read as precise, yet even dates are matters of probability and calibration. Sonar sketches an arrangement of lines and hollows beneath water, and invites imaginative reconstruction. But sonar is itself a translator affecting a conversion from depth to image. It does not speak the language of purpose. The modern apparatus adds useful grammar to our interpretations, but cannot, on its own, supply meaning. Meaning is negotiated between instrument and humanist ear. Public discovery of such sites often produces a simpler narrative, one that comforts and captivates. The sunken forest, the heroic flight, the drowned village. Media like tales with sharp edges. They prefer a beginning, middle, and end. Yet the real acoustic history of the place is more akin to a fugue. Overlapping lines, return motifs, and slow transformations that do not cleanly resolve. The popular story is not dishonest, it is a selection. It must be balanced by the patient work of field notes, chord diagrams, and the laborious kindness of conservation. There is a human tendency to enclose loss in ritual. The community will often ritualize the memory of a loss, a day of remembrance, an offering at low tide. And these acts generate loud, legible sound, drumming, singing, the measured toll of a bell. Yet such ritual verbosity masks the quieter, more mundane practices that prolonged survival demands. The two sound forms coexist. One is cathartic, the other functional. We are richer for both, and poorer when we mistake the ritual for the only truth. How does this knowledge affect us, those who listen now? Perhaps it gives a modest, corrective humility to recognize that environmental change is rarely neat and blameworthy in a single installment. It asks us to consider responsibility as diffuse and to temper moralising inclinations. Yet it insists, too, on human ingenuity and small-scale heroism. The steady placing of stakes, the knotting of a rope, the patient moving of a dike. These are not heroic in the flash sense, but they are the hands that hold a community through change. I will end this section with an image that is both concrete and ineffably melancholic. Stand at the margin where bog becomes sea and imagine a ledger of gestures. Flint strike, hearth tending, peat cut, reed placed, stake driven. Each recorded as a sound, small and percussive. Each accumulating into a long music that becomes, in time, indistinguishable from the tide's hymn. There is no single verdict here, only a chorus, and in that polyphony we may learn a kinder way of listening. The tide came with a small, private complaint that morning, not the trumpet of disaster but the modest grumble of an old habit. And when the fisherman hauled his net he found, among the usual weed and shell, a length of blackened wood that plopped upon the planking with a sound like a thing waking. He eased it free and held it up. An edge flashed where water polish had met human craft. It was not merely driftwood. He wrapped it in oilcloth and walked to the harbor's little stall where curios were kept, and over a thermos of tea a neighbor turned the timber and said a single careful thing. Someone worked this. That small verdict set a long, patient machinery in motion. That is how rediscovery often begins, as irritation that insists on being noticed. A blurred photograph follows a curious post, and suddenly sea-scorched wood becomes an argument on a local forum. A coastal surveyor, out mapping habitat, sees a regular pattern on sonar and raises an eyebrow. A line becomes a possibility becomes a plotted point. Sonar is a peculiar listener. It translates depth into grayscale and refuses to explain, leaving human imagination to supply grammar. We watch the diver prepare with ritual calm. His boot touches the ladder. He breathes once and lowers. Underwater sound is muffled and intimate. A slap becomes a basin's whisper. There, in the cold hush, the diver's gloved hand meets something worked by another hand long ago, a smoothing of grain, a plane where a tool once bit. He feels the tiny notches of intention, the small punctuation marks of human labor, and in that touch the past becomes tactile. The diver surfaces with a single word, wood. That quiet announcement is a kind of benediction. Objects arrive at the water's edge like reluctant confessions. They are carried in crates, rinsed with distilled water, and set upon trays that look absurdly clinical against mud and rope. The field tent is full of small, modern sounds: zippers, cups clinking, the soft rasp of a brush coaxing peat from a plank. There is also the hum of instruments, a portable centrifuge, the gentle beep of a reading, the quiet click of a camera shutter recording the object's face. Modern discovery is domestic in its noises. There is nothing theatrical, only persistent, careful labor. In lab light, the timber offers details that the sea could not obliterate. A conservator lifts a small peg and traces the crosshatching where a thumb rested long ago. A paleoecologist reads pollen like a patient book. A dendrochronologist taps rings and says with the precise humility of an interpreter, "This suggests a season of slow growth." Carbon dates arrive as numbers and probabilities. They are not verdicts but suggestions that will be stitched together with patience. The laboratory's voice is soft and collaborative. Questions, cautious claims, mutual noting. Public attention moves to a different tempo. The press enjoys headlines: sunken forest found, tidy and loud. Walks are organized for low tide. People stand at rope lines while a guide explains peat anoxia and the miraculous preservation it affords. Children are carried close to the edge to point at exposed stumps. Elders bring stories from kitchen table memory that fit like keys to small locks. There is a sweetness to such communal notice, people meeting their pasts, but it carries risk. Footsteps multiply. Fragile hollows that once preserved pollen or tiny artifacts are at risk of trampling. Managers speak in pragmatic tones: scheduled access, protective roping, volunteer patrols. They speak in the necessary language of prevention. There are noisy choices to be made. To lift a plank is to stage a small, noisy drama. Winches groan, hoists complain, slings creak. Machines interrupt the soft music of tide and bird. Extraction yields an object that can be conserved, displayed, and taught from, but it also removes context. To leave an object in situ is to accept the sea's governance and to risk the slow erosions of chemistry and biology. Each path has cost and benefit. Each is discussed in rooms where accents are careful and tempers sometimes taut. Funders speak loudly about educational value. Conservators speak softly about ethical stewardship. There are handfuls of moments that do not belong to press releases. Imagine a woman stooping at low tide to lift a small, blackened peg. It slides from the mud with a little sigh. Under magnification, a faint polish appears where a thumb once rested, and the woman inhales a soundless, private gasp. She folds the peg into her palm and places it in her coat, as if tucking a secret bird against her chest. That private commerce between person and object, small, wordless, profound, is often the reason people keep coming back. It is not spectacle the past offers us, but intimacy. Scientific work proceeds in small, disciplined noises. Pollen is coaxed from cores with a careful efficiency. Each grain counted alters a curve and slightly redraws a picture of past vegetation. Sonar lines are rerun and compared. Cores are taken like black candles pulled from Earth. Specialists confer in low voices. This horizon suggests storm sand. This pocket holds well-preserved organics. These rings imply a cooler decade. Data is argued over gently, rechecked, and rephrased. Science is a chorus that prefers modesty, claims hedged with probability, interpretations framed as conversation. Artists, in turn, respond in their own vocabulary. A composer attends an exposed platform and writes a descending cello line to emulate tidal breath. A painter sets canvases to capture the cold gray of peat, the deep brown of old wood. A poet drafts a single line that will be quoted in leaflets and slow walks. When art and science meet, the public receives not merely information but feeling, an invitation to inhabit the past emotionally as well as intellectually. The arts enlarge the acoustic palette. There is an ethical grammar about telling stories. Whose voices should lead exhibitions? The fishermen who know the tides? The scientists who read cores? A thoughtful exhibition pairs objects with oral testimony. A small plank under glass alongside a recording of a local describing the place in childhood terms. A sonar image accompanied by a schoolchild's drawing of the shore. Such juxtapositions make exhibits humane. They allow objects to speak with mouth and memory. Stewardship is not simply preservation, it is conversation. Periodically, the team descends a stair that edges beneath the tide and into architecture. The water changes character around that stair. It whispers differently, as if of its own accord, lowering voice in reverence. We move slowly, our gloves rubbing along carved risers, feeling the softened edges of human workmanship. In a sheltered antechamber, under a skin of cold water, pockets of peat have preserved fragile things. A scrap of woven cloth, a small carved animal, a bead threaded once and worn smooth. We lift a toy, small, crudely carved, and it is like opening a letter from someone whose name we can never know. That toy, a tiny animal of wood smoothed to the shape of a thumb, with a faint smudge of red ochre still clinging in a fissure, becomes the pivot of feeling. It is not grand, it is ordinary. Yet in its ordinariness it acts as a hinge between us and that vanished life. The conservator holds it under lamp and says softly, "See here, traces of pigment." The admission is small and sacred. We feel, briefly and collectively, the presence of a child's immediate care, the same care with which a parent tucks in a blanket. Such finds complicate ethics. Should a child's toy be shorn from its bed of silt and placed under glass, or left where it slept? The choice is debated with gentle force. Educators speak of public benefit, while others plead for privacy and context. There is no easy answer. Sometimes a replica is made for display while the original remains protected. Sometimes the object is conserved and lent to the museum with clear narratives about provenance and stewardship. This is the work of care, balancing education and dignity. Laboratory days follow, slow and attentive. Photographs are taken, measured drawings made, microsamples removed. The noises are small, camera shutters, the soft scrape of a scalpel, the faint whir of a machine, but their repetition has a liturgical quality. Each label affixed is a promise to future readers. Each entry into a log is a vow to memory. The lab is where the private gasp of discovery becomes communal evidence. Public programs develop with care. Guided walks, school visits, and community talks are constructed to teach humility as well as curiosity. Exhibits are designed to include local testimony. Conservation notes explain method as well as meaning. There are volunteer days where locals learn to record finds respectfully. There are quiet evenings when elders recount, in low voice, the names of places that the maps have forgotten. Stewardship here is daily and ordinary. Rope mended, timbers checked, access schedules kept. The sound of volunteers sweeping a path is as reverent as any hymn. Politicians and activists enter the conversation with different registers. Models of sea level rise and carbon calculations come with urgent diction. The public conversation can become heated. Yet, even in the most charged meetings, there are small, shared goals. Protect features, educate the next generation, provide sustainable access. These negotiations are part of the rediscovery's modern chorus. Soft breath. They are practical, imperfect, and necessary. When fieldwork winds down, the site is left in negotiated balance. Some timbers conserved and stored, some left with protective measures in place. Interpretive panels are set with the gentleness of good pedagogy. Schools are linked to museum programs. Conservation funds are allocated. Volunteers continue to visit at low tide, eyes tuned to small changes. For many, the most affecting sound is not the publicity but the conservator's careful instruction given to a child. This needs slow work. The child inhales that lesson like a vow. We leave the site gently, boots soft on planking, The conservator tucking a small toy into foam with the care one gives a sleeping infant. Machines are shut down, tents packed, and the last light in the field lab goes out. The tide returns and, for a while, conceals what it has briefly revealed. The human noises fade. The sea resumes its old music. We let the night fold around us like a soft cloak, and in that folding the pace of things changes. We have walked where trees once kept accounts. We have placed our palms on stone that remembers hands. We have listened to the laboratory's careful voice and the diver's single, benedictory wood. Now the story asks for a different skill, the art of letting go, of returning the mind gently to the body, of translating wonder into the slow architecture of rest. Begin, if you will, by finding the weight of your feet. Feel how the ground supports you, broad and patient beneath each sole. Notice the small give of the mattress or chair beneath you, as if it were peat offering just enough. Let that sensation become a hinge. The world we walked remains present, but it is now part of the surface that holds you. You do not need to travel farther. We will name 4 quiet things to hold as we let attention loosen: sand, salt, root, breath. Repeat them in the mind as if placing 4 pebbles in a palm. Sand, the granular percussion that rearranges underfoot, patient and indifferent, making room for every step you have taken. Salt, the small sting and the preservative residue of long weathering. It keeps and it erases. Root, the hidden labor that anchors and feeds. Its work is slow and steady. Breath, the tide's inhalation and exhalation mirrored in our own chest. Listen first for sand. Imagine the tiny clicks of grains settling into hollows. Each sound is small and unimaginably numerous. The sand is not impatient. It receives and smooths. If a print remains, the tide will soon gather it like a hand smoothing a page. Let the idea of smoothing settle over some small, anxious thought, perhaps something you will postpone until morning, and watch it soften. Now attend to salt. Inhale the faint perfume of brine in the back of your throat. It is a taste that remembers storms and harvests, preservation and loss. Salt preserves stories in small bones and pegs. It also reshapes edges until sharp things become gentle. Allow the salt's double action to teach you a paradox. Keeping does not always mean clinging. An erasure can be a form of mercy. Feel root. Picture the undersong of growth. Roots working patiently in darkness, anchoring the world and changing it by inches. Roots do not hurry, they persist. Place your attention at the base of your spine as if a root resides there, steady and hidden. Feel that small, steady support. When worries arise, imagine them as surface weeds, noticed, acknowledged, and not threatening the deeper hold. Return to breath. Match your breathing to the tide we have heard. A slow inhale as the sea draws back, a longer, softer exhale as it returns. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold 1. Exhale for 6. Repeat with the measured patience of the Hythe's long, low music. We will now fold the ziggurat image into this quiet. Recall the carved stair, the lintel with its small circle-in-circle motif, the toy smoothed by a thumb. These are the small hinge points of story, intimate relics that make strangers seem near. Imagine the lintels cool in your palm. Imagine the toy's worn curve resting in your hand. The stone and the wooden animal are not spectacles, but domestic anchors. They teach us endurance and the small economies of care. Consider legacy in modest forms. Names spoken at kitchen tables, stakes driven with careful hands, volunteers sweeping a path, a conservator's gentle admonition to a child. This needs slow work. Legacy is daily, not monumental. When you feel the impulse to grand gestures, let the thought settle like a pebble and yield to smaller, steadier acts. We have talked of many voices, fishermen, divers, conservators, children, and all of them matter. Now we will let those voices morph into an inward chorus. Here, in the imagination, a local elder saying a single, kind instruction and low voice. Mind the step. That phrase, simple and humane, is a closing liturgy. It asks you to proceed with care toward rest. Let that instruction be a benediction on your evening. There is a sound that will now guide us to sleep, the tide's long susurration. Imagine it as a single, unbroken hum that underwrites all other noises. It does not demand action, it accompanies. Breathe with it. Each inhalation aligns with the tide pulling away. Each exhalation aligns with its return. Let breath become rhythm and rhythm become descent. We will practice a small repetition to steady the mind. For short phrases, soft and slowing, spoken mentally and allowed to slide into silence between them. Repeat in thought only. The sand remembers. The salt keeps and erases. The roots hold steady. The sea breathes on. Each phrase is a tiny bell. Let it ring once, and on its fading let the mind go gentler. If an image rises, a worry, a remembered task, notice it like a gull passing overhead. Observe without following. Let it incline away, returning to the larger arc of tide and root. You are kept. You are, for this small time, in the custody of patient elements. The moral is modest. Attention begets care, and care begets continuity. We will close now by returning to the first sounds with which we began. The hush of moontide, the gull's solitary vowel, the creak of old wood. Hear them again in a reduced register. The gull is further away and kinder. The stump's creak is a whisper. The tide is a long, soft exhale. These are not facts to be solved, but textures to rest upon. Allow them to veil your thoughts like a curtain. One more loop of our phrases, slower and lower now. The sand remembers. The salt keeps and erases. The roots hold steady. The sea breathes on. Let each pause be a place where the body sinks a little deeper into rest. We will finish with two sentences that close the door gently. The tide is carrying everything home now, softly, without hurry. And if you listen very closely, you can hear the trees, beneath the water, settling back to their slow and patient sleep. Sleep, too. The sea keeps its watch, and all things rest beneath her hand.